So the first thing I want to do is read something from one of the people whose charts we just worked with. So Renaissance, okay, she was in the very first one. So if you've been, we used her chart in the very first one. So if you've been kind of involved and listening, going backwards and listening to some of the past ones, although it's not really necessary. But she says, I'm one of the charts that was used as an example in the first Astro Study webinar, and I somehow just stumbled across it. It was really informative, and the observations were spot on. I mentioned something about a brother. I do have a brother, and I mentioned something about feet because the ruler of the sixth, the ruler of the third was Jupiter in the first house with Mars, and he was the ruler of the third house and the sixth house. He was really close to the ascendant. So I must have said something about there being an important brother, and then a brother who had maybe gone through some stuff, and then also that there may be injuries to the feet. I do have a brother and did suffer injuries to my feet, have an ongoing kidney issue. I don't know that, I don't remember. Oh, it's Libra rising. So Libra represents the kidneys. So that's why, and maybe later on we'll come back and we'll look at that in relation to what I'm reading at the moment. So I just thought that was great. That's exactly basically what I envisioned the using these things for. So using these study charts so that I could get some kind of confirmation when I make my, when I make my pronouncements, so to speak, based on what I'm looking at. So let's go ahead and come to our latest consideration. And it's funny, every time I do, when I say, oh, you know what, this one's really good. Oh, Diana-verse is here. Hi there, welcome. We just started, so you're in perfect, we just started, Diana. So this is perfect timing. And it's perfect timing because if you look at what the eighth consideration says, it's going to basically say, look at the fourth, sixth, fifth, and sixth considerations, and then this as well. So the eighth consideration is that you see and consider how many of the aforesaid ways or the aforesaid considerations, which you must use in judgments, you ought to consider. Oh, wow, and Amelia Smith is here. Lovely, fantastic. Let's see, I'll wait 1 second to welcome her in. Welcome, Amelia. If you're new, this is the perfect, if you're new, welcome, Amelia. If you're new, this is the perfect class, or if you've kind of been coming in and out, this is a really good class to start again with, because I pretty much have been doing this every time. I've been kind of reviewing where we've been and then going on with what we're doing. So I think that will be, so I'm sure that'll be useful for you. And in this particular case, the consideration we're working for, so so for Amelia, Diana, I know you're pretty familiar with, but Amelia, so we're working with this book called The 146 Considerations by Guido Bonatii. And so each of these are things to look at in a chart for delineation. And so we're now at the eighth consideration, but we're going to go back and look at the fourth, fifth, and sixth in a second because he refers to them. Okay, so it's that you see and consider how many of the aforesaid ways or the aforesaid considerations you ought to consider. Okay, so that's already, there he is, which are 31. There are 31 considerations that we would, or 31 things to look at. The 17 aforesaid ones on the impediments of the moon. So there are 17 ways in which the moon can be impeded or impeded. And the 10 ways in which a planet can be impeded. Okay, so that makes 27. And then the 4 ways by which the planets rejoice, which we're going to look at today. Excuse me. So some of you may already know about the joys of the planets, but there are 4 types of joy. So you probably know about this first one, which is the houses that are the joys of the planets. So Mercury rejoices in the ascendant, the moon in the 3rd, Venus in the 5th, Mars in the 6th, the sun in the 9th, Jupiter in the 11th, Saturn in the 12th. If you don't already have that information, you might want to write it down, because when we come to these charts that we're going to look at, then we're going to look to see if any of that is happening. Okay, okay, so let's say that one more time. So Mercury gets the ascendant, right? Mercury gets the ascendant. The moon gets the 3rd house. Why does the moon get the 3rd house? Well, let's do them all, and then I'll talk about why I think, and also some of the stuff that I've read about why. Venus the 5th, Mars the 6th, Sun the 9th, Jupiter the 11th, and Saturn the 12th. And what I'm going to put next to some of these are the names of some of these houses, right? The original traditional names for the houses, which gives us something of a clue. And the last is bad spirit, but then we've got, oops, then this one. This one is called Goddess. Okay, so that makes sense now, right? Okay, so Mercury rejoices in the ascendant because the ascendant is connected to your skill and talent and ingenuity and intelligence. And also the first house rules the head. And so Mercury represents the conscious mind or the rational mind. So having Mercury in the house that represents the head is quite useful. And then Mercury is the skilled, he's the magician. Mercury is the skilled magician / trickster. And as a result, the ascendant is a good place for him. I have Mercury in the ascendant. Moon in the third, Goddess. Okay, so that makes perfect sense. So the third house was called Goddess. And I keep saying I'm going to do it, but we are going to look at the third house and movie actresses, because especially in the movie actresses of the earlier part of the 20th century, like Betty Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Greta Garbo, Marilyn Monroe, all of those people, the third house is huge in all of those charts. So it's something we might want to look at. Venus, the fifth. Now, remember the fifth house is the house of pleasure and amusements. And also it's the house of children. How do you get children? Sex, the sexual pleasure. Venus, right? So what you're going to find is that, or what we are finding rather, is that all of the houses that are joys for a planet have a tendency to either fortify their significations or reflect their significations, no matter what sign the house is. So for instance, we would expect Mercury in Virgo, right, or Mercury in Gemini, we would expect that house to fortify Mercury's significations. But if Mercury's in the ascendant, no matter what sign it is, it will do that as well, because that is the house of his joy. Same thing with Moon, same thing with Venus in the fifth, same thing with Mars in the sixth. So Venus could be in the fifth in a Gemini, and still, that would still be her joy. And not, of course, she could be it in Scorpio or, the Virgo or all those other ones that are not so good either. And of course, that would then have a different, that would be how we would come to a judgment, right? Okay, Mars in the sixth, and sixth is bad fortune. The other thing that the sixth house was known for was enemies traditionally. And so Mars is the god of war, right? So enemies makes a good sense for that. And also struggling against adversity. Mars loves the battleground. What you tend to see with Mars is in the sixth is you tend to see people who fight for a cause, or who are lots of activists and cause people are Mars in the sixth, because they're fighting against the thing they don't like. Or the condition that they don't like, right? Which would be bad fortune. The sun in the ninth, so the sun is God and religion. The ninth house is God, religion, prophecy, astrology, this divination. The sun is all of those things, and so is the ninth. Jupiter is the embodiment of good spirit as the benefic, as the greater benefic, and Saturn is the embodiment of bad spirit as the greater malefic. Okay, so that's our first section of what do we call it, of joys. The second section of joys, and once again, we are going to go backwards and look at all the other things and then include these joys. Oh, Eloise, yay. Wow, big class today. That's nice. Okay, well, good. And I was just telling Layla Akbar that, I had originally, when we get to the charts, I'm going to want you, if you feel comfortable, I'll want you to take off your mute and to make this more of a discussion, because I was saying that really I had envisioned this class as practice for you all to basically start looking at charts, being able to identify the things that we're talking about. Okay, so the second is when a planet is in its own domicile in which it rejoices. So not only do planets have houses in which they rejoice, they have signs in which they rejoice. Now, what we're going to find is it goes along with the diurnal / nocturnal thing. right? So for instance, Saturn rejoices in Aquarius. Why? Because Aquarius is a masculine diurnal sign, and Saturn is a masculine diurnal planet. Same thing with Jupiter and Sagittarius. Sagittarius is his masculine diurnal expression. Mars and Scorpio. Mars is, this is the only one where there's a cross-gender aspect to it. Mars is a nocturnal planet, so it's his nocturnal expression that is his joy. So his feminine nocturnal expression is actually his joy because he himself is nocturnal. The sun in Leo, of course. Now remember, sun and moon only own one sign. Venus in Taurus. Why? It's her nocturnal feminine expression. Mercury in Virgo. Now remember, Mercury is nocturnal with nocturnal planets, diurnal with diurnal planets. He's masculine with masculine planets. He's feminine with feminine planets. Right, so there's all that stuff going on with him. He is hermaphrodite and neuter. So as a result, that means that Mercury is in joy in Virgo because it is not only his domicile but his exaltation. And then last is Moon in Cancer, which makes perfect sense. Okay, so and this is one of the reasons. I mean, look at this: Saturn, who rejoices in Aquarius. So by giving Aquarius to Uranus, we've basically taken the joy of Saturn away. So what little joy Saturn has and gives, we've taken it away from him, or the moderns have taken it away. We haven't. Okay, so we just looked at houses that are joys, and now we've looked at signs that are joys, and now we're going to get to positions that bring joy to the planet. So it's when the diurnal planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and the Sun, and Mercury, it can be Mercury. See, notice how Mercury is in both lists, are with diurnal ones in the east, and they are oriental from the sun. What does that mean? East of the sun. We'll look at all of this in a second. And they are next to the oriental line. What's the oriental line? The oriental line is the ascendant. So what they're basically saying is, if Saturn, Jupiter, the sun, and if Mercury is diurnal, if they're on the ascendant, if they're in the east, and if they're rising before the sun, so that's the important thing. That's what makes them oriental or eastern, right? So a planet is oriental if it is rising before the sun and setting before the sun. It's in front of it. So it will be in a lower degree of longitude. So if the sun's at 15 Aquarius, anything earlier than that is oriental of the sun. Now, and the nocturnal ones, who are Mars, Venus, Moon, and Mercury, are with nocturnal ones in the west and occidental from the sun, and especially next to the western line. So we just talked about what is oriental versus occidental. So we want them to be in the west, which means the descendant or the seventh house, or near the seventh house. We want them to be west of the sun, so they would be in a higher degree of longitude than the sun, and then next to the western line, which means on the descendant. Okay, so we'll look for that. So we're looking for, so for instance, in that chart, I'm going to have to find that REM sense chart, since she did give us some good, she gave us that good feedback, and I really want to see it. Let's see, REM sense. So I just want to have it on hand so that we can use it when I'm ready. Because she had Jupiter, which is what? A diurnal planet. She had Jupiter, a diurnal planet, right on the ascendant. Now she had it with Mars, right? So it was in this aspect to Mars. So Mars is what? He's a nocturnal planet. So that wouldn't satisfy this particular condition, right? So the condition is that the diurnal planets are with diurnal planets in the east. So in that case, we have some issue when we had Jupiter and Mars in conjunction in the ascendant, right? Because a diurnal planet is with a nocturnal one. Okay, so any questions about that, put it in the chat. I'm happy to go back over it. And once again, we're going to use charts, and we're going to look for all of this stuff. The fourth is when the three superiors, so that's Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, are in masculine quarters. So there are 4 quarters to the chart, right? There's three houses in each quarter. And so as you can see, from 10 to 1 and from 4 to 7 is the masculine quarter. So we want Mars, Jupiter, Saturn in the masculine quarter. We want Venus and Moon in the feminine quarter. So that would be 1 to 4 and 7 to 10. All right, so we will look at all of this stuff in a second, but first, I'm going to go back over some of the stuff that we've already talked about, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay, so the fourth so this is the most important one, which is why I keep coming back. The fourth consideration is about what causes things to happen or to go kersplat or to fuck up in the chart, right? So if something comes to be and is perfected, or there are things that will show that things are not going to come to be, right? So this is how we know. This is how we figure it out. And so there's 16 different ways to kind of notice that. And we'll just talk about advancement, which of course is if a planet is in an angle or succeeding house. Retreat or deterioration, which is if a planet is cadent. Connection, conjungi, joining, connection, conjunction, joining. That's any applying aspect. What does an applying aspect mean? A faster planet is in a lower degree in its particular sign and is aspecting a slower planet. And we'll look at those things in a second. So for instance, the moon is the fastest and Saturn is the slowest. So connection. Separation, so that's when the faster planet has already left. So that's when let's say we'll use moon at 12 degrees of Aries and Mars at 13 degrees of Gemini. When the moon is at 12 and Mars is at 13, the moon is applying to Mars because the moon is faster and the moon is in a lower degree in the sign in which she is in. However, if we have Mars at 13 and the moon at 16, then we now are in disregard or separation because the faster planet has already left the aspect and has disregarded it and is going on to the next thing. Transfer of
It's a little more complicated.
So yeah, transfer of light. So we're gonna kind of, it's better to look at that with an example. But I will come back to it because I'm always looking for it now. And we do have some charts that have it. But let's just say this: Planet A is applying to the aspect of Planet B, but so is Planet C. And let's say Planet A is at 12, like we just had with the moon. Planet B, Mercury is at, or Planet B, the Mars is at 16. Then Planet C, Mercury is at 14. Or no, let's do it the other way. Mercury is at 12, Moon is at 14, Mars is at 16. So the moon is then translating the light from Mercury to Mars, and we'll look at all of this with examples. So the moon is basically, it's called transfer or translation. We know it as translation of light, but transfer of light. Collection or aggregation, we're going to look at this one too, just to make sure that we all know, but that's basically if one planet is towards the end of the sign, and as a result of many different translations of light, it goes finally to that last planet. Let's see. Collection is if 2 or 3 planets are applying themselves to some star situated in its own place. Oh, well, that's a different one. 2 or 3 or more are being joined to one planet, and it collects their light and receives their natures. So this is a different kind of collection than I've ever seen, but that's interesting. But this is the kind of collection we're talking about. And you can see my, okay, so I actually have a little thing. Aquarius 23, Mars at 18, Moon Aquarius 23, Mars 18, Jupiter 21, Saturn 26. Okay, so that means that the moon is finished with Mars and Jupiter and is now about to oppose the Saturn, who will collect the light of the moon, Mars, and Jupiter. Once again, we're going to have plenty of time to look at all of these things when we get to them. So the 7th is forbidding or prohibition. We'll talk about that. We haven't really been looking at prohibition very much. It doesn't show up that often, but it's important when we do see it. So if you remember, if you were here for the second one, or I think maybe only Diana was with me for the second one, we talked about reception in deep detail, and I will continue to be, I'm kind of looking at everything in this way. So we've talked about pushing nature, which is when planet A is in the sign of planet B and is applying to planet B. We talked about pushing power, which is when planet A is in its own sign and applying to any planet. And then we looked at pushing management, which is basically what happens when any planet is aspecting any other planet and they transfer houses. But of course, that's when there will be no more aspects in the sign in which the planet is. So it's finished all of its connections and separations, and it's most specific for the moon, but this is a way in which things are impeded. Return of virtue, I'm so into this right now. I am so into return of virtue. And I wish I could remember the chart where I actually saw something. And because of the return of virtue, it was clear that it would not happen, or the thing was not taking place that they were asking about. And sure enough, it came out that it wasn't. Return of virtue. We're going to talk about this one. We're going to go into detail about it because it's when we get to the charts, though. We're not going to talk about it now. Pushing of virtue, we talked about. Pushing of disposition, which is pushing management, we talked about. Pushing of virtue or strength, which is pushing power, we talked about. And then we talk about how planets are made fortunate and how planets are made unfortunate, right? And that's actually, and then the last one was how the moon can be made unfortunate. And that's where we come to condition number 5. So I'm going to speed through this one. Okay, if she's the moon is combust, if she's in, now remember, I think when it was with Diana, we were talking about this, and I had remembered that if the moon is in an aspect to a planet who is in detriment or fall, that it was supposed to be bad, and I couldn't find it. It's here. So the second is when she's in the degrees of her own dissension. So that's when she's obviously either in Scorpio or Scorpio or Capricorn, right? And then it also says, or when she is joined to a planet in its own dissension, namely that the planet is in its own dissension or the dissension of the moon. Oh, okay, so that's another one too, right? So if the planet is in Cancer or Capricorn, that's bad, we know that already. But if the planet is in its own detriment, so for instance, if the moon is in Cancer and she's applying to the square of Saturn in Aries, that's not good for her. I mean, it's not good for her because she's squaring Saturn, right? The third is when she's in the combust degrees, which are the 12 degrees before the exact full moon. The fourth is when she is joined to the malefics, corporal conjunction, opposition, or square aspect without perfect reception. Okay, we're going to talk about reception, but this one is important. This is the thing that most people overlook a lot. And it's not just the moon, any planet. Any planet that's being squared, opposed, or conjunct, or is conjuncting Mars or Saturn or the moon, or not the moon, the sun, that is a malefic situation for that, unless there is reception. Now with the sun, it doesn't matter, right? Because the sun will be combusting it if it's in conjunction. But unless there is reception, this one is really important because it's always overlooked. If it's with the head or tail of the dragon. The sixth is when she is in Gemini. I only learned this through this because it's the 12th sign from her own domicile. The seventh is when she is at the ends of the signs, ends of the signs. So that's because the malefics own the terms of the ends of sign. Also, and that makes sense when you think about it, because I had always learned that planets at the beginning of signs are in a state called infancy and are weak, and that planets at the end of signs, like from 27 to 30, are also weak, and they are in a state of old age. And so, the malefics are Saturn and Mars, and Saturn obviously represents old age. So there's some aspect to that. But so end of signs is not good for her. Eighth is when she is in the 6th, 8th, 9th, or 12th from the ascendant, right? 9th because it's the opposite of her joy. The 9th is when she's 15 degrees. Okay, that was the via combustive, which I'm not going to deal with. Void of course. Slow in course, which I've never really dealt with, but might be worth looking at. Failure of her light. That means she's about to go to the new moon. When she is besieged, we still haven't gotten to besiegement yet, but we're going to. I think we've talked about it when we've looked at our examples. And then the 14th is when she is in the azimine degrees, weld degrees, smoky degrees, and dark degrees. And this is medieval degree theory. Last, we're going to go through all of this now, and then we're going to go right to the charts, and that's what we're going to do for the rest of the day. Oh, this is 5. Okay, so 6. Okay, so 6. Oh, so this is how planets, and this will be fast because so many of them go over. First of all, if a planet is cadent from the angles and ascendant. So if it's in 3, 6, 9, or 12. Okay, planets cadency was considered an impediment. And I think I mentioned last week that Rob Hand said that he didn't find that to be the case, but I kind of am. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at it, I'm keeping an open mind about it, but I kind of feel like cadency shows itself somehow, or maybe not. of which the first is when a planet is cadent, second, when it's retrograde. I'm really, really coming to understand retrogradation as an impediment. Definitely, I have my chart ruler is in detriment and retrograde, and I'm definitely dealing with and feeling that. Third, combust. Okay, so cadent, retrograde, combust. Those are the first three things. These are the things to be considering. These are the things to be looking at. So if you have your chart in front of you right now, you should be looking at those and looking at every planet and kind of going through this list for yourself, which is what we're going to kind of do when we get to the other charts. The fourth is when one of them is in the opposition of or the corporal conjunction or the square aspect of one of the malefics, which we just talked about. Besiege, we are going to talk about. When we see it, we'll talk about it kind of like with return of virtue. And when a planet is 6 is when a planet is joined to a planet in its own dissension or its own fall, namely in opposition to it, right? So here's the thing. What they're saying is when it's joining a planet in the planet, so planet A is joining planet B in planet A's dissension or fall, right? It's not necessarily saying the same thing about the moon, which is when another planet, and this might be an important point. I mean, I don't know if this, I'm kind of speculating, but I'm assuming that I'm correct, and it might be good to kind of go back and look at the text and see it at another point. And I'll come back around it. But for the most part, remember the moon is the transmitter of all influences. So if she is connected to a planet who's in detriment or fall, then she is transmitting that. She's transmitting its deficiency, right? So she's just transmitting. She's just contacting and transmitting down. So if she contacts and transmits down my Jupiter in Gemini, who's retrograde, well, first of all, that would be a return of virtue. But secondly, it's going to transmit that. It's going to transmit how fucked up Jupiter is and how he doesn't really work so well in certain situations and certain issues. Seventh is when it's joined to a planet cadent from the ascendant. Okay, so that's interesting. Now, notice also it said when it's joined to a planet in its own dissension or in its own fall, namely in opposition to its own domicile or exaltation, right? And then this one is when it's joined to a cadent planet. So cadency is supposed to weaken, right? It's deterioration or retreat. So it's connected to a planet in retreat, right? So this one might be one that I don't know so much, if I think that's really, it's like, planets are connected to all kinds of planets, but it's something to look at. So it's saying if the planet A is connected to planet B, and planet B is cadent, that's an impediment for planet A. Interesting. Obviously, not necessarily for planet B, right? Because if planet A is in an angle, that might help planet B, I guess, is what they're thinking. The eighth is when it's peregrine. So we all have peregrine planets in our charts. It is considered an impediment or a detriment, but I tend to think of it, especially in light of natal charts. Now, notice when we're talking about horary or we're talking about electional astrology, we want our planets to be as strong as possible in order to affect the thing that we want. So we don't necessarily want to, as a matter of fact, Lee Lehman, amazing medieval ancient astrologer and horary specialist, genius, she, in her book on the martial art of horary, she herself said that, I remember that was the first time I saw it. She said it's not enough for the planets to be in conjunction, or the conjunction that we're talking about here, right? In an applying aspect. It's not enough for the significators to be an applying aspect. They have to be strong enough to make the thing happen. And so, and once again, if all of you have been with me for a while, so except for maybe Amelia, but I think Amelia's been in and out, but all of you have been with me for a while. So one of the things that we think about is, oh shoot, I forgot. I forgot. Never mind, we'll go on. But peregrine, we'll look at peregrination. The thing to know about peregrination is that peregrination means that you have to be on your toes, right? I live in a foreign country. I have to be on my toes. I have to figure out how I'm going to ask things. I have to figure out the words for things. I have to figure out how much how to understand the answer to my question. So there's all of this kind of need to be really, really, and as a matter of fact, when they mentioned a planet that's peregrine, they mentioned that it was thoughtful and clever, right? You have to, there's a certain amount of mental acuity that you've got to have as a planet that's in a peregrine sign, because it's not your domain at all. It's not a place that you know. So you find yourself dependent. So the planet will find itself dependent on the planet who owns the sign quite often. That's why, for instance, if you have pushing nature or pushing power, something like that, then that's really useful for a peregrine planet, right? Planet is with the head or the tail of the dragon. And when it's impeding itself, so that's when it's in the seventh from its own domicile. So here's the thing, maybe number, what was it? Isn't that interesting? I think because number 10 is basically saying when the planet itself is in its, is when it's, oh, in the seventh from its own domicile, which of course is a detriment, or not received. And then number 7 was if it's joined to a planet, Katie, from, oh wait, 6, joined to a planet in its own dissension or its own fall. So maybe it is a distinction. So maybe 6 and 10 are the distinction. So something we'll look at. But obviously, I guess if it's for the moon, then it's for everybody. Okay, I'm ready to go to charts. And you can feel, once again, you can feel free to unmute yourself and join in. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just go through the entire list, or as much of the list as we can. Now let's actually start with the newest considerations. Is anything in its joy, right? And so the first joy is the joy of the houses, the joy of the houses. Mercury is not in the first, the moon is not in the third, Venus is not in the fifth, Mars is not in the sixth, Sun is not in the ninth, Jupiter is not in the 11th. So none of the planets are in their joys. Now, what about the signs of their joys? Remember? So remember that Mars's joy was Scorpio. Venus's joy was Taurus. She's in Gemini, for she just left it. Isn't that interesting? Let's see. Mercury's joy was Virgo. Now, Mercury's in his own domain here, but he's not in his joy. And he's not exalted as well, right? Jupiter is in the opposite of his own sign, which would be his joy. Right? Sagittarius would be his joy. Mars's joy is Scorpio, he's not there. Moon's joy is Cancer. And I think that's it. And Sun's joy is Leo. So nobody's in a joy. Now then the next thing, nobody's in a joy via sign or house. The next thing we're looking at is, are the superior planets, or rather, are the diurnal planets with other diurnal planets in the east and occidental and oriental from the sun? Right? So this is where we'd want them. We'd want them around here, and we'd want the sun to be last. So in this particular case, everybody is occidental from the sun. Everybody. And he's going to set first. Everybody's going to set after him. Remember, if they are oriental, they will rise and set before him. So no, nothing. And then the fourth set of joys. Now, these joys are probably not going to show up as much, but if we have them in mind, then it gives us a special kind of understanding. And also, once again, remember, if a planet is in its joy, but it's fucked up and detriment and retrograde and all those other things, that can be a weird, we need to be able to deal with the ambiguity of mixed significations. And, something I talk about a lot. Oh, okay. So now let's do our, it's into the fourth one is, are the mass, the superior planets are, the superior planets are in the masculine quarters, which are these. These are the two masculine quarters, and these are the two feminine quarters. So the superior planets would be in the masculine quarters, and the feminine planets would be in the feminine quarter. Venus is the only one. Okay. So as far as our little mini list of the 4 different joys, these are our masculine quarters. These are our feminine quarters. Venus is there. Okay, so that's the only joy. That's the only planet experiencing any kind of joy. But of course, look, she's in the 8th house, which is not our favorite, right? Not our favorite, which means there may be a dormancy to her of some sort. Remember, the 8th house is called what? It's called like oh my God, I can't believe I can't remember. Can anybody help me? The 8th house is called what? All right, well, I'll come back to it. It's called the idle place. It's called the idle place. because things in that house go idle or maybe not seen on the surface, right? Because the 8th house is also going down into the underworld. Okay, so let's now go to the beginning of our list, which is looking for angular planets. So what's advancing? So Layla Akbar and Kabiri were with me last week, so you're welcome to help me out again. Obviously the moon. What else? This triple thing here, this little system here, the sun. So that's what, 4 planets, 5 planets already. And so this particular opposition is in retreat. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about these days is, you know, if a planet is in retreat, then things that are in aspect to it are also sometimes also in retreat. Does that mean that that particular opposition is not necessarily functioning as acutely as others, right? It's in retreat. Or is it functioning worse because it's in retreat? We don't know. So the issue is the 7th house and the 4th and the 5th. So already we know 2 things. I mean, I'm just gonna flop around. This Mars is in retreat. It's also in fall.
How do you know it's in retreat?
Retreat. Oh, thank you for asking. So the planets that are in a state of advancement are in angles or succeeding houses. The angles are 1, 4, 7, and 10. The succeeding houses are 2, 5, 8, and 11. A planet is in retreat if it is in 3, 6, 9, or 12, because those are the cadent houses. So if you remember when we thank you. So when we just talked about what was the first impediment for a planet, it was cadency. And so Mars and Saturn both are cadent. Now, obviously all this other stuff, Mars and Saturn. Now here's the thing. Saturn is on the part of fortune, and I have been using the part of fortune as an ascendant. So on the external level, Mars and Saturn are cadent, but on the underground level, with the part of fortune as an ascendant, they're on the ascendant in 7th house. So I don't want to forget I said anything, but that's just another little tidbit. Okay, so that means that there's going to be issues with the 7th house in this chart, right? It's in fall, it's cadent, it's opposing a malefic. Remember, those are all on our list. So already we know we don't have to go one planet to one planet to one planet to one planet necessarily. If we know it well enough, we can go, wait, what's going on with this Mars? It's fucked. It's in fall. This is, we really don't want that Mars and Saturn in opposition. That tends to be calamity. So we already know that there will probably be issues with the relationship, and there may be issues with the person they're in partnership not getting along with their family or their father, right? Because Saturn rules the 4th. Is it nighttime? No. So Saturn isn't the significator for father because it's daytime. The sun is. But look, this part of fortune is right there. Or it could also have to do with home, since it's the part of fortune, which is where we get our finances from, right? So there could be some issue with finances that has to do with real estate between them as well. So that's how we do it. So that basically was what I just did, was the pushing management. Pushing management happens anytime any planet comes into aspect, is applying to another planet. And what's pushing? The 7th house to the 4th house and the 5th house. That also means what? That means that the ruler of the 5th is being opposed by a malefic that is cadent and in fall, which means what? Problems with having children, or it could also be miscarriages or abortions, right? Because Mars is when blood is drawn, right? Mars is cuts and bruises and drawn, or surgery, cuts and bruises and drawn blood, right? So we've already got a little bit of an idea just based on the cadency, fall, and opposition to Saturn of Mars. We know that this is probably among the most impeded planets in the chart, the Mars. Okay, now on the flip side of this, look at the Mercury. Oh, this gives us a great example also of translation. Planet A is at 0. Planet B is at 11. Planet C is at 6. It's going to transfer the light from Venus to Jupiter. Planet C is also in its own sign. Now it may. I did not look this up. Notice the S. I did not look this up to see if it was in its first or second station. If it's in its first station, then we have something called Refranation, which is when a planet is applying, and before it can get there, it goes retrograde and goes backwards. So that would be Refranation. If it's stationary and about to go direct, then the Mercury is definitely translating the light. Now, here's the other thing. Jupiter is also in his detriment, right? But look, he's with Venus. He's in the same sign with Venus. She's a little too far to be applying to him at the moment. But remember, Mercury is translating, and Mercury is in his own sign. So we've got 3 or 4 different things going on here. First of all, Mercury is pushing power to Jupiter because Mercury is in his own sign and applying to Jupiter if he's in his second station. Secondly, if Mercury is in his second station, he is translating the light from a benefic to another benefic. So this Jupiter is fortified by that. And then thirdly, Mercury is with Venus and Jupiter. So, and in his own sign. So this particular system is really quite strong. It's in the 8th. So we have to figure out kind of how it shows itself or whether or not. Right? This could be some kind of dormant literary talent or some kind of dormant, it could be something dormant or dormant. Well, Mercury Venus is usually music. This could be some dormant, but it's in Gemini, so not necessarily. But there could be some dormant musical talent or something that hasn't seen the light of day about them. And also look at how close the sun is to it as well, right? The sun. So the 8th house is a really important house here, right? So it's really kind of being featured, shall we say. Okay, let's see, anybody else? So now let's find the conjunctions or conjungi or joinings. Let's find the joinings. Let's use that term from now on. Let's find the joinings, right? That's applying aspects. So we have one, right? Possibly Mercury to Jupiter. And when Venus gets to maybe 4 or 3, she will also be applying. Then let's see. We've got the Mars to the Saturn, which we don't love so much. And look at how, guess what? We've got a return of virtue. Okay. Now we can get into what return of virtue is. Return of virtue happens when a planet is applying to another planet, but it is either retrograde or combust and can't take on the virtue of the planet. Now, so there's 2 types. There are 2 types of what's the word, of return with virtue. Now, mind you, so this is, remember, the Saturn here is retrograde. So that's the thing to be understanding. The Saturn here is retrograde. So he will return the virtue to this Mars. He's not going to accept it. He's going to return it. So there are 2 ways that a planet can return virtue. It can return it with fitness, and it can return it with detriment. Now, technically, this would be a return with detriment because the planet who is pushing is cadent. But because Saturn is in the exaltation of Mars, this would be considered an opposition that is a return of virtue with fitness. Now, it's still cadent. Mars is still in fall. It's still, and so basically what that means is Saturn can't help Mars to do the thing that it wants to do. Now, of course, it's in opposition, so Saturn isn't helping him anyway, right? But Saturn can't help Mars. So if Mars were in the 10th house here, Mars could do it himself, right? Because he's in a state of advancement, right? He's in a state of advancement, so he can push his issues to the fore and maybe even try to get them to happen. Now, of course, we know that the opposition does not tend to be a good aspect for perfection, right? Or it tends to be you get what you want, but you wish you didn't, so we know that already. And then we also know that Mars is weak. He's cadent, he's in fall. So even though there's return with virtue, this Mars might not be able to make it work, might not be able to make the 7th house work, which might also mean he might not be able to really upset the Saturn as ruler of the 5th as much. Who knows? I'd be interested in seeing what EV God has to say about that. But definitely there's some very specific concepts that are kind of in, and see, as a result, what happens? We pull out. Once again, remember, I've been talking a lot about how this represents narrative. how this pulls the narrative out of the chart and says, hey, this narrative is the one we're really looking at. I mean, there's all kinds of narratives in the chart, right? There's more than one. But when you have your applying aspects, then you're looking at, oh, wait, what's applying? What's separating? You know, what's finished, right? The moon is finished with Jupiter. So that's done. She's on to whatever the next thing she would be onto. But guess what? Oh, yeah, which is this. This square to Saturn. Now, I mean, Sun rather, sorry. Now, remember we had, if indeed Mars is in the second station, then Mars would be pushing power, which is when planet A is in its own sign to Jupiter, right? And applying to planet B. In this particular case, we have pushing virtue, or pushing nature rather. Pushing virtue is that. Pushing nature. Pushing nature is when planet A is in the sign of planet B, and it's applying to the aspect of planet B. Now, in this particular case, we also have a mixed reception. The moon is in the sign of the domicile of the sun, and the sun is in the exaltation of the moon. So this is a very useful square. This is a very useful square. So remember, if you remember when we were talking about reception, one of the things that reception mentioned or said about reception was that reception removes evil, which is why we now know that not all squares and oppositions, well, oppositions, but not all squares are created equally. Not all aspects, period, are created equally. This one is very different than another, right? This one is not the same as if, let's say it were moon in Virgo and the sun in Gemini, right? There's no reception between those because remember, reception is association by essential dignity, right? So the moon is in the essential dignity of the sun, and the sun is in an essential dignity of the moon. And so that's why we have reception. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the 11th house and the 10th house. That's nice. But look, we've got the sun kind of going towards the 8th, which isn't so nice. So it could be friends that help in unseen ways. It could be underground type friends. Look how Ketu is in the 11th. It could be friends who are a little bit underground, or it could be a fencing operation for jewelry, right? Venus is jewelry, and Sun is Sun is things that glitter and gold. It could be a fencing operation for jewelry that's helping her out with her career, or something. I mean, I'm really being funny, but there's something interesting about this. There's something interesting about this square that I find kind of fascinating. All right, so let's move on. Oh wait, this is the REM sense chart, but I don't want to look at that right now. Okay, hot tamale 5. Okay, so Layla's, come off mute and help me. So who's advancing? Right, angular is succeeding. So what would be that? So here's our angle 1, 4, oops, bam, Saturn.
Yeah.
7, bam. Sun, Mercury, Venus, and that's it.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what we, so anything, okay, now, anybody in joys. So first house, Mercury, no. Third house, Moon, no. Fifth house, Venus, no. Look at that. Right on the cusp of the 6th. Mars
right on the cusp of this joy, yeah.
Yeah, Mars is yeah, isn't that cool? So Mars is right on the cusp of the 6th. He's in his joy, and he's in his own sign. He's in domicile.
Yeah.
So even though he's cadent, he's in the house of his joy. So once again, with Mars in Aries, Scorpio rising too. I had a really good friend, Mars in Aries, Scorpio rising, Mars in Aries, 26 degrees of Aries, and she was super militant Black activist. She was, she was always fighting against, fighting against. That's often how this. So there could be. Look at how the moon is applying to the trine, right? Moon's at 20, right, and Mars is at 25. So that's one of its closest aspects, the moon. So that's the 9th house and the 6th. So this person could be involved in all kinds of radical theory or radical philosophy or things of that nature. No, not necessarily, but look at also, we have the same thing we have in the other chart. this moon sun square, and exactly the same signs.
That
Leo,
has that full reception. Yeah.
and that exactly that full mixed reception. Exactly. So we know the moon is busy, right? She's really busy transmitting. She's busy transmitting the sixth house. She's busy transmitting the eighth house and the seventh house, right? Or now that's only if we're looking at the planets that are in houses, which we don't do. So she's transmitting the 12th and the 7th with Venus. She's transmitting the 10th, and she's in the sign of the 10th, right? So there's career-oriented stuff here. And once again, this time, remember, it was, excuse me, it was, sorry, I keep doing that, it keeps coming down. It was Cancer on the midheaven before. Now it's Leo on the midheaven. So still both connecting to the 10th house, and then the moon's in the 9th. So what they do might have to deal with education or dealing with children involved, because Jupiter is 5. Not necessarily, but it could definitely be dealing with teaching. She could be it could be dealing with teaching. Look at how Venus and Mercury are also in Gemini. This person must have been born close to the time of the other person. How interesting. So because the Mercury's in Gemini at 15, the Venus is now at 26. So this person is born after the person we were just looking at, right? And a few years later. And a few years later, because the Saturn's in Pisces. Okay, let's look at who else is conjuncting anybody. Bam. Oh, nope, because Jupiter is in retrograde, so that wouldn't happen. What about, is Mars aspecting anyone? No. Is Venus aspecting anybody? Oh, she just left it. Look at that. Venus is at 26 Gemini. So she's in disregard to Mars. And then anything else? No. Okay, so that's kind of and we already looked at the joys and everything. So you see how quickly we can actually, once we know these things, how quickly we can actually get to it. The moon, if you remember, or if I remember, one of the good things for a planet is if it were being applied to by a well-situated moon. I think we could say that about this one. And sure enough, that's happening. So I think that should be useful for this Mars. So this person is obviously very sixth house oriented. And remember, sixth house is the house of servants. But like I said, it's also enemies and adversities and difficulties. So this person would be very, there are people who, in the face of adversity, wilt. And there are people who, in the face of adversity, get mad and make it happen because out of spite. That's this person. This person is going to, you're not going to tell, you can say it's not going to happen? I will fight to make this happen. It is going to happen. The willpower of the Leo moon, and then this Mars that says, I'm not taking no for an answer. Even though it's Caden, it's in the house of its joy. Very, very interesting. Okay, we're moving on to Kitty Xander. What do we see? So Venus, and look, not only is she angular, she is in her own sign. Now, here's the thing about it. If you remember, we talked about, matter of fact, we're going to get to this. We're going to get to this in the next week. The strongest part of a house, or this seems to be what Bonatii believed, the strongest part of the house was the actual cusp. And the most effective part of the house was 5 degrees before the cusp to 15 degrees after. So even though the Venus is angular in her own sign, she's not in the most active part of the house. But she's still a pretty good thing. When we get to fixed stars next week, we'll talk about this stuff. Okay, so Venus, so let's see if there's any, since she's in such good shape, let's see if there's any applications or anything to her. And look at that. Venus is applying to the sextile of Jupiter. Jupiter's in Pisces, which is the what? Pisces is the exaltation of Venus. So she's not only pushing power to Jupiter, Jupiter is receiving, is basically in his own sign. A planet in its own sign can receive anybody. So that's just a general rule. If a planet is in its own sign and it is applying to them, or it's in an aspect to them, even if it's not pushing nature, pushing power, all of that stuff, it will still receive them.
Does it help that it's the fifth house, that it's Venus's house of joy, or does that not really matter?
In this case, not necessarily, in my opinion. And I mean, I think that's an interesting layover to think about. And also, Venus is one of the triplicity rulers of the house. So it's daytime. So she is the first triplicity. She's the first triplicity ruler, which represents children. So in that particular case, I think it's more important in that case than it is in the fact that it's her joy. But the fact that she's in her own sign, Jupiter is, I mean, look at how fecund this Jupiter is, right? Jupiter represents fertility, right? Water signs are fertile. We've got the ruler of the fifth it's in the fifth in a fertile sign. Very nice. However, are there any other applications to Jupiter? So we've got two planets that are in really good shape. Venus, angular and in her own sign. Jupiter, succeeding in his own sign. Both of those planets are in states of advancement. However, there is another aspect to Jupiter, this one. The Mars is applying to the square of Jupiter from Jupiter's detriment. Right? Mars is in Gemini, which is the opposite of Sagittarius. So we already know that when a planet is in conjunction, square, or opposition to a malefic, it's an impediment. We also know that if a planet is in aspect or a joining of any kind to a planet in its own dissension, so now we know that number 6 was right. Number 6 is right. If the planet is so if planet A is in planet B's fall or detriment and is applying to it, that's bad, right? I call these negative receptions. So it's a negative reception when a planet applies to a planet that is a planet either that is in its own, in its particular, let me do it again. I call it a negative reception when planet A is either applying to planet B and planet B is in the detriment or fall of planet A, or this particular case where planet A is in the detriment or fall of planet B. So we can call this pushing detriment, right? So instead of pushing nature, it's pushing detriment. So this Jupiter, it's a little bit more ambivalent now. It's not quite, this looks so fantastic for children and sensual pleasure and all of that. But what about this? Right on the cusp. So when I saw this square, I wasn't surprised about this at all. There's some kind of ambivalence. Remember, Gemini and Pisces are what we call double-bodied. There's ambivalence. This person is probably fertile, but there might be ambivalence about having children, right? Venus is the ruler of the 7th with the ruler of the 5th. So she should be, or he, or, Katie, she should be, what's the word? Getting people in, people should be coming in that are interested in her. It should be attracting. That's the word I was looking for. She should be attracting a lot of suitors or friends, and she might not like men, or she might like artists or people that are, because this is a very feminine 7th house. Look at how the moon is right there. Oh, we didn't even notice that. The moon's in advancement because she's right on the cusp. Saturn is in advancement because he's right on the cusp. Right? Venus is too. So this is such a feminine 7th house. But look at that. The Saturn close to the 7th, to the cusp. The what is it? The South Node close to the 5th. So even though we've got this. So there's something where it should be fabulous, but I think we talked about K2, my ideas about K2 based on Vedic astrology, and where K2 tends to be, K2 is the South Node, where K2 tends to be where we become disillusioned. It's because K2 is what is called moksha karaka. Moksha means to transcend the cycle of birth and of death and rebirth. And so to achieve moksha is basically liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. And so as a result, if you are liberated from the cycle of death and rebirth, you are not creating any new karma. You are not creating any karma. And so that's what I tend to find with K2 is that it doesn't want to create new karma in the area where it is. And so it creates disillusionment. It creates a disillusionment with the area. so that you don't really want to do it. And even if you have it, you don't really, there's just this kind of constant disillusionment around the area. So here we have the K2 right on the 5th cusp. So this person may, because it's such a fertile chart, and despite the Mars, since it is such a fertile chart, and look at how the Mercury is in Cancer, Mercury's ruled the part of fortune, the Venus is in Taurus, so strong and can produce children. But we've just got that Mars, and we've got this, which just gives us a little bit of, which makes it a little bit more subtle. And then we've got this. Now, so that can mean that it's a very solid, materialistic even relationship, right? And could be very solid and stolid. And we plan everything out, and we no surprises. And it could be that kind of Saturn and Taurus. It might not necessarily mean that Saturn is negating it or denying it, although it could also be that. But with Venus there, Venus is stronger. It's her house, and he's in it. So I think that the Venus is strong enough to make it happen, but probably once it does, this Moon Saturn thing comes up. And so the Moon Saturn, which would be, don't over emote. You're showing too much. You're doing right. A Moon and Saturn is the Moon's flow, and look, she's already in a fixed sign. The Moon's flow is stopped by Saturn, and she's made cold, right? Because Saturn is cold and dry. Okay, so that Jupiter is getting a lot of stuff. And look, there's even a disregard with the Sun. So the Sun just left it, and the Sun technically is applying to the Saturn, who's at 0 Taurus, right? So when the Sun gets to 0 Cancer, it will be aspecting. Moon and Mercury are in disregard. And I think there's nothing else. Everybody's over here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, perfect. Milk Maiden got milk. I love that one. Oh, we never looked to see this. Oh, let's go back for a second. We didn't look for joys. Let's look for joys. Right, that's what we were talking about today, so we should be doing it. Okay, 1, no. 3, no. 5, no. 6, no. 7, no. 9, no. 11, no. Okay, signs. Jupiter's in Sag. Moon's in Taurus. Ah, bam. Venus is in the sign of her joy. No, no. Okay, now, so we don't have any superior planets on the eastern angle. We don't. But we do have the Moon on the western angle. She's with a diurnal planet, though, right? We want the diurnal planets to be with the diurnal planets in the east, and the nocturnal planets to be with the nocturnal planets in the west. She's closest to a diurnal planet. Matter of fact, she's in disregard, very close disregard to the diurnal planet. Is she aspecting anybody else? Oh, okay. So Moon to Mercury. The Moon Mercury is aspecting. Okay, aside from that, let's see. Oh, the other joys are the superior planets in the masculine quarters, Jupiter is, are the feminine planets in the feminine quarter. And we can say that, yes, Venus and Moon are. Okay, so that was our little list of joys. All right. Now, when we get to the end of these charts, we only have one more after this. I'm going to open it to questions. I'm sure you have questions, or comments or whatever. So I'm going to just kind of open, especially for Amelia. Diana, you've been in and out, so I'm not so worried about you, and I'm sure Layla Kabiri has questions. But, people, I'm sure you all have questions of sorts, and I'm moving kind of quickly. So if you need me to go back over something, whatever, but no request is idiotic. No request is too dumb. Right, so just feel free to ask me anything. Okay, so we've got already. Wow, were we supposed to post our chart? No, not necessarily. I mean, if we have time later, we might be able to look at it. But this is really about you all being able to helping you all to be able to cold read a chart, helping you all to orient yourself to how to read a chart. I mean, obviously, all the stuff that we're learning. It's kind of like tarot. I also study and have studied tarot for a matter of fact longer than astrology, and have been certified to teach it for, I don't know, for 30 years at this particular point. But one of the things about the tarot the type of tarot that I learned was it was specifically a personal oracle for ourselves, but of course you could read for other people. And with reading for yourself, there was this constant thing where you had to remove your own obstacle. You had to remove your own bias. You had to remove your own desire. Because one of the things she would say is that you might ask a question, but the tarot may not be answering that question. So I could be asking, oh, am I going to meet my boyfriend sometime soon? And the tarot could be saying, why don't you have any money? But if I want to, I can see boyfriend stuff on it and then be disappointed afterwards when none of the stuff that I saw actually happens. And so that's why I think this also is also useful, because looking at a chart that's not your own, you're not projecting anything onto it. All you're looking for is the list, so that when you come back to your own chart, then you'll do the same thing. Because we don't want to have shitty Venuses like Layla Akbar. We don't want to have shitty Jupiters like me. We don't want to have, you know what I mean? We want the chart to say our life's going to be fabulous, and it doesn't necessarily. So we have to be able to handle that. We have to be able to look at that and then figure out how we're going to maneuver within whatever is going on. Okay, that's my little spiel. So we've got a diurnal planet at the east, and unfortunately Mercury is not diurnal. Why? Because in order for Mercury to be diurnal, the sun would need to be either at some later degree of Leo or in Virgo or something like that. So as a result, Jupiter is with a nocturnal planet. Now, I don't think this is necessarily terrible because he's not with Mars or something like that, like REM sense, but Jupiter is near the angle. It's within 7 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and call it angular, to be honest with you. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Now, I've heard a few things. One is that 5 degrees before an angle, but I've also heard 5 degrees before any cusp of any house, you put it in. But I also heard that the medievals would use 8 degrees for an angle, 5 degrees for a succeeding house, and 3 degrees for a cadent. So we could just go with the general rule of 5, but since it's the ascendant and Jupiter is pretty close, I'm going to go ahead and go with this. Now we know we've got the ascendant kind of close to Regulus. That's cool. What else? What other joys? Let's see. 1, 3, 5, 9, 11. Nothing, right? None of those. Moon's in the 9th. Remember, that was the opposite of her joy. Let's see what else. The signs of joy. Saturn in Cancer. No, doesn't look like anybody's in any sign of, well, Moon's exalted, which is lovely, but nobody's in the sign of its joy. We've got a superior planet in the masculine quarter, and we have 2 superior planets in the masculine quarters. So that's nice. So this Jupiter is in relatively good shape. I mean, yeah, this Jupiter is not terribly bad. And then we have the Moon in the feminine quarter. So all of these, the list that we looked at for joys we have. So even though the Moon is cadent in the 9th house, she's in the sign. Oh, she's not in the sign of her joy. She's in a joy, a minor joy, because she's in a feminine quarter. So now let's look at who's advancing and who is not. So we decided that Jupiter is. Mercury would not be. Mars is. Saturn is. Now, for somebody like Amelia, who's been kind of coming in and out, when we talk about advancement, what we're really saying is that the planet is in a position where its natural significations and its house significations by rulership can advance. So for instance, in the case of this Mars, its natural significations of contention and anger and all of those things can manifest in the 7th, can advance, right? So we don't like this. Matter of fact, in Vedic astrology, this is called Kuja Dosha. It's a state of Mars which is bad for marriage, which is difficult for marriage. So he can show his natural, and then he also is going to show the houses he rules. He rules the 9th, he rules the 4th. So we've got a 4th house and a 9th house connection that is being advanced in a contentious way via Mars. Okay, so that's basically what we say when we mean something is advancing. Same thing with the Saturn, right? Saturn is advancing. That means he can give us friends who are downers, right? He's in the 11th. So he can give us, Saturn is the downer. He can give us friends who are downers. And he can also give, let's see, 6 and 7. He's the ruler of the 7th. Isn't that interesting? And look, there's a separating trine between Mars and Saturn. So we know, okay, so already, even though it's separating, we know that there's some stuff going on. And look at the Uranus. I always the word I use for Uranus is destabilization, right? So we know already that 7th house issues, and that could be not just romance and love, that could be partnerships, that could be lawsuits and contentions of any kind, right? So we know this person should be going through some type of contention, maybe a lawsuit. Now, here's the thing. What's the second triplicity ruler of the air? So we're in daytime. Air triplicity is Saturn by day. So Saturn would represent the marriage, or women is what they say, but women means marriage in that era. So Saturn would represent marriage, and Mercury would represent lawsuits. And notice how it's with the planet who is going forward. It's with the ruler of the 5th and ruler of the 8th. So it could be around taxes, right? Both of these planets Mercury represents lawyers, and Jupiter is judges and the law itself. So already we've got there's a possibility of some kind of lawsuit in this chart. There's a possibility of and there's also a possibility of difficulty having a harmonious significant other chart relationship as well, right? Because the Mars in the 7th. That's who's zooming who. So like I said, we already have that. We have a disregard between Moon and Mars, and she would have been pushing power, right? But she would have been pushing power and pushing detriment at the same time, right? Because that's the detriment of Mars. Capricorn, Saturn is in Cancer, which is the detriment of Saturn. So we have some planets that are badly, kind of badly situated, and some that are well situated. This Moon is very well situated. Like I said, in the 9th house, whatever, but definitely the Saturn is not so well situated. The Venus and the Sun and the Mercury are not so well situated because of the 12th house. Venus is right on the cusp. Sun is right inside it, right? So those things. So where do we have any communions? Oh, Moon to Mercury, and then Mercury to Jupiter. Now, the Moon is pushing power to Mercury. Moon is in Taurus, pushing power to Mercury by square. So that's good. That makes this square useful. What would that be? That means the 12th house, oops, and then what? The 2nd house. We don't necessarily like that. Let's talk about this for a second. So we've talked a lot about how there's no such thing as a good versus bad aspect. It's easy versus hard. And considering that this is supposed to remove an evil, it's supposed to remove an evil, but it's also giving an evil, because the pushing management is house 12 to house 2. So there's going to be some kind of self-undoing around money. And look, it's also with the significator for the law, and also notice that Jupiter is the ruler of the Mars. So it looks like there may be some kind of and that maybe this lawsuit might even be a part of it. Now, of course, like I said, I'm just spinning off the top of my head. I could be completely wrong, which is why I did this in the first place. But we just had Renaissance. Some of you who came in later, I read from somebody who saw it, and she was like, "Boom, you were right on." So it's something. So we need to take these into consideration. The connections are Moon to Mercury to Jupiter, Moon to Mercury, Venus to Sun, and I think that's it. Yep. And then there's a separation between Mars and Saturn. Okay, and our last chart. Okay, so what is advancing? I'd say this. What is this? What degree is on the? I can't see what degree is on the. Fuck. Hold on a second. Yeah, I can't see what degree is on the thing, but it looks like. Oh wait, it's far enough away from the 12th house. Can you see? Oh, can you? So the defining factors of the previous chart were law and marriage, is what she said. I would say, I don't necessarily say defining. I would say that it was something, it was the low-hanging fruit of the chart. It was the, it was the stuff that was at the surface. Something of interest. Yes, yeah. So, but more than something of interest, something that indicates something specific, something that indicates something specific, I think is more apt. Something that indicates something specific. And remember, once again, the weakest link in astrology is the astrologer. So it's on me to be able to figure out what it means, or maybe I've read too much into it, and it doesn't have to necessarily be connected to law and lawyers and all of that necessarily, but it could be. She could also be one. So that's a possibility too, which would then really make contention a part of the person's life, right? If they're a lawyer and they're a litigator, then that would be right up there. We didn't really ask people what their jobs were, but everybody gave us a little tidbit of information about themselves. So this one is trust your universe. Trust your universe. Oh, I have no comments for trust your universe. Oh, too bad. Okay. All right, so let's go advancing. Definitely, it looks like all of that stuff is, because 7 to 14, all of that stuff, right? All of some Mercury, Mars, Sun, Venus, all of it is advancing because it's all in the 11th. Now, at some point, we might want to look at some of these from a whole sign standpoint, and we can get even more. There'll be other things. Some things will go cadent, some things will go angular. Usually that ends up changing. And so once again, we want to be able to handle this ambiguity. We want to be able to take it in and be able to use it and be able to work with it, right? We don't want to be like, well, which one is right, right? They're all right. Okay, now this is also something I want to show you. See how the nodes are at 6 degrees, and Venus and the Sun are at 3 and 7. Venus and the Sun would be called on the bends because they're squaring the axis of the nodes. And usually that means that there's some, especially the Venus, usually that means that there's something unusual about that, how those things operate, or how those planets kind of work, because the nodes are about absence of light. They're about what we do. We either go away. Well, certainly Rahu is about the absence of light, and the Saturn and the South Node is about seeking the true light. Right, so leaving the world to seek the true light. So there's something about the eclipse being on this eclipse, kind of on this kind of ecliptic thing. I don't know what the word to use, but on this ecliptic axis, that's it. On this ecliptic axis, that makes this would make this kind of work differently. Now, the other thing though too is we got Venus in her own sign, but she's combust, right? Once again, we've got mixed significations, right? She's strong by advancement because she's on cadent. I mean, she's in a succeeding house. She's strong by sign because she is in her own sign. And she's in the sign of her joy because it's a feminine nocturnal sign. But then she's combust. So that means any planet that is applying to Venus is going to receive what is called a return of virtue. So in this particular case, there isn't any, because she's at 7. She's already separated from the Sun. Moon is at 19. She's already separated from the Jupiter and the Saturn. Oh, she's not even touching them. Okay, so ultimately, it would be once Mercury got into Taurus that there would be some possibility to see a return of virtue, but there couldn't be because Mercury himself would also be combusted, and so that wouldn't work. And if Venus is applying to anybody, it also doesn't work because she's combusted. So you have a return of virtue where planet A, who is the pushing planet, is what's the word I'm looking for? Is combust. Okay, so let's break down. We didn't have any really good ones to break it down. Break down what I'm talking about to make sure that you understand what I mean. So a planet that is combust or retrograde, so this Saturn and this Jupiter, right? And none of them. Oh, so here's a perfect example. This is even better. Jupiter would be, too bad. Let's pretend he is though. Jupiter would be applying to the exact conjunction of Saturn. If he were direct, he would also be pushing nature onto Saturn by conjunction because he is in Saturn's exaltation. This should be a very good thing. And so if he were not retrograde and Saturn were, then Saturn would return that virtue. Now they are on the cusp of the fifth house, so they're both succeeding. So that would be called a return of virtue with fitness. Return of virtue with fitness, meaning that the planet applying still has the ability to possibly make the thing come to pass. If the planet is with detriment, let's say that the Venus here were at 1 degrees of, let's say it's not a good one, sorry. Let's say the moon, let's use this one. If the moon were at 1 degree of Sagittarius and applying to the sextile of Jupiter, he would be pushing nature to Jupiter, right? From Jupiter's domicile. But Jupiter wouldn't be able to receive it because Jupiter is retrograde and would return the virtue to moon. Moon is in an angle, so it's return with fitness. It would be return with fitness. So we don't have any examples of return without fitness or with detriment in this chart. We do have the possibility, well, there is no return, right? Because the Jupiter is moving away from the Saturn. Well, we kind of have, no, we don't. I keep thinking that these are trining, but they're not. So anyway, so this chart doesn't really have a lot of stuff going on. I mean, it's got the Venus who's in very good condition by sign, and she's in the 11th house, but she's combust, and but she's not in the feminine. She's not in the feminine quarter. So, but she's got those things, and she's in the sign of her joy. Then we've got Saturn exalted in Libra which should already be good, with a benefic planet, which would make that even better, right? Conjunction to a benefic, any planet conjuncting a benefic, that's a good thing for him, but they are both retrograde. So once again, we've got mixed things going on here. And look at who's involved. The 7th house is involved and the moon is there. So we know that this person is kind of either partner or relationship oriented, or relationship oriented. And so when now that means that if Jupiter is the ruler of the 7th, Jupiter being with Saturn is not as good, right? If the planet is conjuncting a malefic without reception, there is reception because Saturn is in Libra and so is Jupiter. So this conjunction would actually be a really decent one if they were not retrograde. It would be a very good conjunction. But of course, and if the Venus were not combust, then she'd be in quite a good condition as well. Now, of course, yeah, no, she's not. Yeah, no, never mind. Yeah, no, she's really at the end of the 11th house, what we're going to use for this kind of chart. Okay, so that's the 5 questions. Anybody have questions? Or you feel free to just blurt them out. If you want to write something, you can. What I may do is go back to REM sense for a second. Doesn't look like there are any questions. I know you all have some questions. Layla Kabiri, I'm sure, has a question or has something. Okay, so I got a message from REM sense. Okay, good. I got a message from REM sense, and she said, I happened to see the video and your shit was right on. And what I had said was there must be something with the brother because the ruler of the 3rd is right in the ascendant and advancing. So if there was a brother, there were issues around the brother would be advancing. Also that the ruler of the 3rd was with Mars, who is the natural significator for brothers. So it showed that that was obviously an important brother. And she said yes. And then I also said because Jupiter was the ruler of the 6th and in the 1st that there may have been problems or injury to the feet. Also because Mars is with the ruler of the 6th. So the feet could have been injured, right? Mars's injuries. So she said, yes, that was the case. And then I said, well, the ruler of the 6th is in Libra, which is the kidneys and etc. So there may also be lower back and kidney problems. Boom. Yes, there were lower back and kidney problems. Notice, once again, we've got a diurnal planet with a nocturnal one, right? And we have a planet in conjunction to a malefic, even though it's separating, right? So in this particular case, this Jupiter can give us some relatively, Jupiter's supposed to be really good and fun, but remember, it's by the house Jupiter rules will change that. His position by sign and by house can change that, right? So this Jupiter is not particularly benefic, is it? As ruler of the sixth, not really. It's not super benefic. So this is the way to kind of understand these things. Venus and moon are in a disregard, but the moon is applying to the sextile of Mars. The moon is translating Venus to Mars, which means she will, Venus herself is applying. So Venus is involved in a sextile with reception because Mars is in her own sign. So remember, there are two ways that you can have that kind of reception. You can have a reception when planet A is in the sign of planet B, and that's pushing nature. And then you can have it when planet A applies to planet B, who is in the sign of planet A. And they both disregarded the Jupiter. So there was sextile with reception for Venus with the Jupiter and with the Mars, which helps the Jupiter, but does it? What's Venus? Venus is the ruler of the ascendant, which is what? The body. Here it is again, when we have a sextile, and it should be a good aspect, but it's between the body and illness. It's an easy aspect between body and illness, and Venus is being received by Jupiter because he's in her sign. So he's in the sign of the body. He's in the sign of the planet who rules the body. So we can definitely see that this sixth house ruler, it doesn't look like it would be negative, right? It's Jupiter in the first. That should be good. That should be right. A Jupiter in a state of advancement. But what has advanced is the illness, is the injuries and the illness and the brother. That's the pushing management of Jupiter, right? Jupiter in the first should be good. Anytime you see that, of course, now that we have an idea, we have a list of how planets can be either strengthened or weakened. We know that Jupiter is being weakened by the Mars. That's mainly the only thing, thank goodness. But Jupiter is also trining the Saturn, right? He's applying to the trine of Saturn.
Could you say that the Jupiter was making those other things bigger, like rather than good, just bigger?
Yeah, that's an absolute fantastic point. Yes, instead of making, although what we could say is, or even multiplying, right? So, because remember, Jupiter multiplies things. So there could be, I stubbed my toe, then I broke my pinky, then I broke my foot. Right? It increases and multiplies. It could multiply as well as make bigger.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So because remember, anything that you want multiplication, that you want to increase by multiplication is Jupiter, right? Which is why children. Oh, okay. So we know that we've got the Venus and the Mars Venus and the moon applying to the Mars. This is a translation of light, right? Because the moon is at 2113, the Mars is at 2115. He's taking Venus. So that's a translation. Perfect example. Okay. And that means that there's also a connection between the ruler of the first and the ruler of the seventh, which should be kind of nice. Now that should be kind of nice. And they might even have met the lover through a female friend, because the moon's in the 11th, or they might have met the lover through work, right? Because the 10th house is bringing the ruler of the first to the ruler of the seventh. So this is a perfect example of the narrative of translation or transfer of light, is that a third planet, that you identify who the person might be by understanding who the third planet is. Mars and Venus need to come together. So that means me and my boyfriend need to come together. The moon is helping that. That means something in the 10th house realm is helping. My mother, now remember, moon is mother too. It could be the mother introduced them. Mother could have introduced them. They could have met on the job. The boss, a female boss, could have introduced them. So things like that. She didn't say anything like that, and I know I must have said it. But we also know here, look at that. The Venus is opposing the Saturn. The moon is opposing the Saturn. They're both applying. So the applications for Venus are Mars and Saturn, which is, those are malefics. Luckily, she's got the sextile to Mars with reception. So taking some of that evil away, but then she does have to deal with the opposition to Saturn. So what all of a sudden looked really good might be a little bit more challenging, or rather it could be good, but she might have challenges with it. She might not be able to fully give of herself. She might be dealing with, I don't want to say frigidity, but she might be dealing with coldness in the amorous department, right? Because of the Saturn is cold and dry, and look, she's in a hot and dry sign, right? So she could be dealing with, you know, and I bet this person has a very kind of dry delivery. When they, you know, I bet that, you know, and especially with the Saturn, they might have like this kind of dry what do they call it? Self-placating, not self-placating, the opposite, self-deprecating. Right. So they may have this dry, self-deprecating kind of way of expressing themselves. Look, the Mercury is also in Libra, so representing the Venus, Saturn, right? So that Mercury is speech and the tongue. So, and the moon is, remember, moon and Mercury are both aspects of mind, right? So the mind, this Venus Saturn is impressing itself very much on the mind. As a matter of fact, remember when we were talking about indicators for the soul, the moon and Mercury are both indicators for the soul. Mercury is in Venus's sign, the moon is with Venus. So Venus, or rather this Venus, Mars, Saturn becomes the indicator of the soul for this person, which makes sense anyway, because it's the chart rule. So this chart's busy. Some charts are busy. Some charts aren't busy. And that's one of the coolest things. But it's only when we, the main thing that I've noticed, or as a result of looking at this, the main thing that I understand, have come to really fully understand, is that modern astrology enters the chart via the zodiac. Ancient astrology enters the chart via the planets. And as a result, that's going to be the way that you're going to need to make a shift. Like, we have all this information about the zodiacs and etc., which is fine. But all of that really is the most useful for explaining personality, right? Or explicating personality, or you know, explicating the psyche, so to speak. But we're not really interested in doing that necessarily. I mean, we're able to, but we don't really give a fuck about that so much. We want to know everything, right? We want to know everything. We want to know it in specific detail and nail it, right? We want to nail this fucking chart. That's what we want to do, or at least I do. I don't know about y'all. So as a result, that's what this is the way. In my opinion, this is one of the ways. People ain't nailing charts when they go into the zodiac. They might be producing something that somebody resonates with, which means, yeah, I guess on some level they're nailing it, but that's not really the focus, right? They're not really focused on showing everything that's going on in the person's life, or what the most specific issues. Oh, speaking of which, let's look at the pushing management of Venus and Saturn. So Venus is the ruler of the ascendant, and Saturn is the ruler of the fifth and the fourth. So there may be problems with the family of origin or father, or look at all of that stuff there. The destabilization is in the fourth house. There could be problems with living situations, right? Because fourth house is homes and buildings. There could be problems with gardening but this person doesn't look like they'd be necessarily into gardening or anything like that. But there could be problems with farming and agriculture, because Saturn represents things under the ground in agriculture, right? So that's using his natural significations, and then using his connection to the fourth house significations, and of course it's father too, right? So there could be problems with the father, or problems with all of the family, you know, the family of origin, or a rejection of the family of origin in general. You know, there could be. And so it'd be interesting. Actually, she called and asked for a reading. So I'm going to ask her about that when we, when we do that. Okay, so that's REM sense. Any question about this chart or a comment? No? Okay. All right. So that's the charts that I was, let's go. I'm just going to go to EV God for a second, and we'll just work with it. Oh, you know what? I want to show you another chart. Oh, and I do have some example charts. Hold on a second here. I'm going to pause. I'm going to take off the screen share. Zooming. Effect. Return with detriment. Okay. Okay. You see how the Venus is how the Venus and the Mars are combust. Okay. The moon is applying to Venus. The moon's at 15 Virgo, so this is nasty. The moon's applying to Venus, so she's pushing fall onto Venus by square. So it's a square. Remember what I said? Not all aspects are created equal. This is a shit square. Venus and Gemini, totally peregrine and combust, and with Mars. So we've got the Venus with two malefics conjuncting. So this is right on our list. She's combust, she's conjuncting a malefic. Then we've got a planet aspecting her from square, giving her fall, which she hates, no kind of any reception between them. So this is a shitty square. And then she basically says, no, I'm dealing with the sun right now. I cannot handle your bullshit. So you have to take it back. But the moon's in the 12th house. This is a return with detriment. This might be the chart. This might be the chart that I saw where I was like, whatever those two things mean aren't working. It was the 10th house and the eighth, and and the first. This person may have problems with their mother, right? 10th house is mother. Don't forget, 10th house is mother. This person might, and also moon and Venus are the natural significators for mother. It's daytime, so it's Venus. So look how moon is applying to the natural significator for the mother. So there might be problems. And also the mother herself might have problems, right? Or maybe not so much. Or the mother could have been institutionalized, right? Because the 12th house. So squared to Venus, this moon square Venus, the person could have a problem with the mother themselves could have problems. Then, because of it, also 10th house we know is career. This person could be really struggling with career, right? Because it's trying to come to her, but it doesn't help her, right? Because the 10th is trying to come to her. Moon is the ruler of the 10th, but it doesn't help her because the moon is in Virgo and there is no reception, and it's by square, and there's no reception. So I think that there might be difficulties finding a career and finding a job, or there might be jobs but no career, right? There might be a job where they don't make very much money and that kind of thing, but there should be problems with 10th house issues in this chart as a result. Now, the moon, of course, is also applying to the sun, and the moon is applying to Mars, because the moon has a wide moiety, 6.5, and Mars has 4.5 or 4. So that's about 10.5. So it's within, it's far, but it's definitely in the moiety, which means what? Which means that also there's a return of virtue with this Mars to the moon. And Mars is the ruler of the 7th. So there might be issues with, of course they're going to be, right? Because it's a square. There are going to be issues with love relationships in this chart, right? There's going to be ambivalence around love relationships because Venus is in Gemini and so is Mars. Or this person is hyperpoly, right? Just has realized that's not how things work. And or this person could be asexual. Okay. Now, remember what long time ago, we talked about the planets or the signs that are licentious, right? The planets that are of high libido, and they are Aries, Taurus, we've got the two superiors, Leo, I include Libra, but Libra wasn't included, Capricorn, and Capricorn. Okay, so none of those are really in here except for these two. And the Venus is ruling it in Gemini, and with all of these, this person may be asexual. So this is how I come to all of these, whatever kind of ideas about it, but this is a perfect example of return of virtue with detriment. Fantastic. Okay, why have I been getting so sick? Let's make this a little bigger. Okay, who's the ruler of the 6th? Anyone?
Mercury?
Yes. And is Mercury in a state of advancement?
Well, no, because it's in the 6th, right?
No, he's within 5 degrees of the 7th house cusp.
Oh, right. You're totally right. So then, yes.
So remember, this question was, why have I been getting so sick? Struggling with health issues for 11 years. the sixth house can advance. So the ruler of the first is Mars. Is there anything between Mars and Mercury? Look, Mercury is applying to Mars. It's wide, but is an application. And look, Mars is in, this is a trine with reception, but it's a mixed, not so good one, because Mercury is giving detriment to Mars. Remember when we looked at this a while ago, when we talked about receptions and things like this, this was in the medieval, where we noticed that people that were having issues with a specific part of the body, that one, the ruler of the ascendant was already in a weak state, and two, it was in some kind of aspect to the ruler of the sixth. And in both cases, the ruler of the sixth was giving detriment to the ruler of the first, right? So if Mercury is giving detriment to Mars, and Mars is like, yeah, come, give it to me, right? Mercury, hey, oh yeah, my ruler, my chart ruler is here, yay, or my ruler, the ruler of my sign is here, yay. Ew, he's in Libra, that ain't good for me. But it sure is easy for him to give to me. It's a trine. And notice also, the ruler of the sixth, representing the illness, is advancing. The ruler of the ascendant, which represents the body, is retreating. It's cadent. So Mercury is applying to the Mercury. Now here's something. This could actually be a return of virtue, because Mercury he's about to go, and he's under the rays. And so when they say he's under the rays of the sun, he's within 10 degrees, a little more, he's within 9 degrees of the sun, 9 and something, 9 and 18. So that means that, he's actually somewhat compromised himself, but he's not so compromised that he can't make it difficult for the Mars, especially because he is the ruler of the Mars. If the Mars were here in Aquarius, maybe it might not be so strong. Maybe it might not be able to do it. Maybe it might not be able to put the illness on him. It would try, but because he's weak, right? I mean, he's with Venus, which is good, but they're both going into combustion. Venus is combust, right? So there's a weakening to this Mercury, but it's not weak enough because the Mars is in his sign, and so is the moon. This is the other thing I'm noticing, is that if the moon is in the sign, pay attention to the house ruler. Pay attention to the planet that rules the house that the moon is in. The sign, rather, and especially their house rulership. So for instance, the moon is in Gemini. Mercury is the ruler. Mercury is the ruler of the sixth. That means that the moon is transmitting that. That means that's kind of what this chart is about. The moon transmits Mercury by sign. She's not touching him, but she's transmitting him by sign. So basically this is a Gemini world. It's a Gemini internal world, which also makes it susceptible to the illness, right? Because it's far, but they're still together in the sign. So you've got that, you've got Mercury applying to the trine, you've got the moon there too. So all of these things really kind of end up screwing with the person. I think I must have written something to them. Then you've got Mars applying to the trine of the sun as well. And there is no return of virtue because the sun doesn't get combusted, but the sun is in Libra. So this is a negative reception for Mars. So all of this stuff is not good for Mars, even though, even though Venus is applying to the trine, but she's combust, so she can't really help, and she's in his detriment, so she can't really help too much. So what she might be able to do is alleviate it so that but look at this, struggling with health issues for 11 years. So I guess 11 is better than, this person was born when, I don't know, 19 or 20, 29 or 30 years, right? But 11 years, that's a long time. Let's look at the besiegement charts. Oh, wait, why do I always have such bad luck? What house rules bad luck?
It's bad luck. This is bad spirit.
No, it's bad fortune. It's the other one. It's the one across. So sixth house represents bad luck. So who is the ruler of the sixth?
Mercury.
No, in this chart. Oh, did I not
Oh,
change it?
sorry, we're on a different chart.
Here, let me make it bigger too.
Is that Venus? What are we looking
It
at?
is.
Yeah.
It is Venus. It is Venus. So this person is experiencing bad luck. And so here's the thing. Venus is exalted in Pisces. She's exalted. That means that sixth house issues are strong. Now, usually when I see the ruler of the sixth well placed, it can often mean really good with animals, because remember, the sixth house represents domesticated animals. So you will often see that as well. But look, we've got a malefic in we've got malefic Saturn in the sixth as well. Now, what's going on with the ruler of the ascendant? Look at how the ruler, so wait, the sixth house is 9 degrees of Taurus. Mars is at 5, Jupiter is at 8. So both Mars and Jupiter are already walking into the sixth. Saturn is in there. That means that Jupiter is fucked over. Yes? Because Jupiter should be helping Mars, but he's not necessarily helping Mars because he's in between two. As a matter of fact, this Jupiter is besieged. He's not leaving the Mars. The Mars is going to him, but he is in between the Mars and the Saturn, unless there's something else that might get him first. No, he's in between the Mars and the Saturn. That's besiegement. It would especially be besiegement if it were, let's see, if it were Venus here at 8. So that means that she would be separating from Mars and going to and applying to Saturn. That's the true besiegement. But this, we can definitely say this Jupiter is besieged. Until Mars is at 9 or 10, this Jupiter is besieged. And then when when Mars is at 9 or 10, then you're going to have a triple conjunction with the two malefics. So this Jupiter can't help, right? Jupiter is luck. Jupiter is bounty, luck, wealth. Jupiter can't help. So that's the natural significator of good luck. And he can't be of any service. And he's with the ruler of the ascendant. Then we've got the Venus, the ruler of the sixth, very strong. Very strong. Then, if I'm not mistaken, the moon is an exact square to the Saturn. And look, it is pushing nature. Now, I think I told you last week that I consider things of this when planets are in what we call partile aspect, which is when they're in the same degree, but they might be separating by a minute or two or a few minutes. I call that finishing. I'm just calling that finishing right now, because what that means to me, or what that kind of says to me, is that they're finishing the aspect. It's not fully done. They are finishing the aspect. And this is just me personally. I don't consider the aspect finished until the faster planet is in the next degree. Now, there are all kinds of different ways to do this, and they're different. And I'm not even really doing it the typical medieval way. This is just kind of, and I'm open to change and open to doing it something different. But right now, this is how I'm looking at it. So I'm considering this still, if not an applying, a finishing. It's not, if not applying, it's finishing. It's only 2 minutes past, right? So even Bonatii said, what Omar gives 6 minutes, and Bonatii gave a full degree. Actually, I think even Bonatii was the one that said once it leaves the degree. So maybe I am using Bonatii. But my point about this is a mixed reception. Moon is in the sign of Saturn. Saturn is in the exaltation of the moon, making it easy right? Saturn is hard times, right? Jupiter is luck. Saturn is not good luck, right? So Saturn is hard times, squaring the moon. So once again, if you remember, not if you remember, but the very first thing that I ever did as far as these workshops were concerned was looking at how the moon was more than just our emotions. How essentially looking at the moon in a natal chart in the same way that we look at the moon in a horary chart, which is the moon, which is basically that the moon is the co-ruler for everything, that the moon is, that the condition of the moon dictates the condition of everything in the chart. And on some level, that's the case here. Why do I always have such bad luck? You've got a really, really strong ruler of the sixth. You've got a malefic in the sixth house. You've got the moon applying to the malefic in the sixth. You've got the chart ruler with Jupiter, which should be good, but the Jupiter is not in good shape because he's with the malefic in the sixth, right? So all of that kind of shows, and we might even find out that part of the bad luck is also illness, right? It could be that every time something good is going to happen, I come down with a throat infection, or I can't stand on my feet long enough, or something like that, right? Because that's what we're looking at. Or even my legs, right? Because the moon is and especially because there's that square. Okay, so in every case so far that I've kind of looked at, and to be honest with you, I'm looking like for this stuff all the time when I'm on Reddit, and chart after chart after chart is coming. And especially when we get these specific questions. You know, we get a lot of, oh, what's the perfect career? And tell me about my love life. But if we get a question like, why does my love life suck? The seventh house is advancing somewhere, I promise you. Or there's some kind of aspect where the thing impeding it is aspecting the Venus or the ruler of the seventh, and the Venus or the ruler of the seventh is deteriorating or in retreat, meaning cadent, right? And so this keeps kind of coming up. The sixth house is advancing in this chart. That's bad fortune. The sixth house is extremely strong, and then we've got this very malefic square with reception, which makes it easier for it to fuck with you, right? So it should. Yeah.
I just had a thought, like, because the moon moves so quickly, like it's gonna hit over that point like once a month for that person. Like they're gonna hit some kind of problem with Saturn, and then it hits Uranus, and they have some kind of disruption, and this is happening fairly often for them.
I love that question. So what you're really talking about is lunar returns, and every lunar return is different. So the way that I learned how to read lunar returns were you only looked at the angular planets in a lunar return.
Okay.
Like that you didn't actually, so every month when the moon comes back to it, I've learned a few things about lunar returns. First, that you don't use the lunar return in your natal chart, you use it in your solar return. Second, so I mean, this, not everybody does this, but that's something that I learned. Second is that the moon that the lunar return, that you only look at the angular planets. So that means that every month there's going to be different planets that are angular. So it wouldn't necessarily like bring it on a monthly basis. Okay. Kind of in the way that I don't necessarily think so. I don't think that would necessarily be the case. Let's go to besiegements. Okay, so we talked a little bit about besiegement with Jupiter. And with the Jupiter that we just saw, right, which was in between the Mars and the Saturn by conjunction. And remember, conjunction, square, opposition, those are the main. That's what so any hard aspect to a malefic, right? So what we do have here, let's see, what is it?
The moon doesn't look very good, does it?
Ah, that must be it. Yes, there it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. So the moon is finishing with Mars, if I'm not mistaken. Mars at 2720, moon at 2741. So finishing with Mars. And then the next thing she's going to do, she's not void of course, but the next thing she's going to do is oppose the Saturn. This moon is besieged. Classic besiegement. So finishing the square one and going to the opposition of the other. And there's the opposite type of besiegement, which is the really good kind, where you're conjuncting, sextile, or trining benefics. So you're leaving one benefic and you're going to the other by sextile or trine or conjunction. So you've got the good side of that, and then you've got this besiegement. So that means, so what house is the moon ruling? Anyone? Right, because the moon is besieged. So we know that her house placement, not her house necessarily, just her house placement, but we also know that the house she rules is going to be affected by this besiegement. What does she rule? She rules the 7th, and she's in the 12th. So there should be relationship issues or problems or nothing. Right, moon in the 12th. And is the moon, no, she's not in Capricorn, thankfully. She's in Sagittarius. but this could be, I call Mars and Saturn the anger frustration axis. So this could be that when they go into a relationship, it's anger and frustration, it's contention, it's being controlled, it's right, because we got the Saturn, who is all about control and hierarchy, and we've got the Mars, who's all about arguing. So this argument, I was trying to say. So this person could be could find themselves pushing against a very controlling, authoritarian type person. They may attract that type of person, right? Because we've got the Mars. Is the Mars retrograde? No. Wait, is it? No. Okay, so it's because we've also got what? We've got the Mars applying to the square of Saturn. And also, now here's the other thing that I like to think about. Mars and Saturn both have rulership of Capricorn. Capricorn is rising. So these are all things to be looking at. These are all things to be kind of thinking about, looking at, and taking into consideration, right? So we've got the Moon already screwed up, but also the Mars is screwed up, and the Saturn is too. So that means the ruler of the ascendant, the ruler of the 10th, the ruler of the 7th, there's problems in all those areas. There's problems in all those areas. And tell me something, is the T-square, because it's a T-square, is the T-square advancing or deteriorating and retreating? Leila Kabiri?
Please. I guess it's, I'm not retreating. I'm not fully sure.
Yeah, it's retreating.
It is, okay.
Right, because the Moon's on the cusp of the 12th. Let's make this a little bigger. Or can I? Yeah. So the Moon's on the cusp of the 12th, right?
Yeah, right.
Mars is in the 9th. Saturn is in the 6th.
So then, okay. Given the house placements or like what they were about.
That's when we talk about advancement versus retreat or dissolution, that's what we're talking about. We're just talking about, the other term for that is accidental dignity. That's all we're talking about.
I don't know why I keep thinking it has something to do with applying or separating. That just gets out of my head.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's conjunction. Oh, as a matter of fact, you know what? Does everybody have a link to the book? Because I actually have a link to the book to give people so that you yourselves can also just go ahead and start kind of using it and looking at it. Hold on one second. But yeah, so keep into account, remember the very first things we always look at are the planets in a state of advancement? Are the planets in a state of dissolution or retreat? And that's only based on whether or not they are angular or succedent, which means they would be advancing, or they are cadent, which means that they would be in retreat. Okay, this is about to come up, and here it is. Okay. Oh, wait. Oh, good. What are we looking at? We're looking at that one. All right. Good. Chat. Okay, so I put the book into the chat. It's a MediaFire link, so you just click on the link and it'll download it for you. And so that's a good way. So basically what I would do is go back to the book and just kind of look at the stuff that we've been talking about, right? We started with 4, 5, 6, and now we're on 8. And just kind of get yourself kind of resituated around that. Just to keep yourself from being confused. It's easy to be confused. There's so much information, right? There's so much information. It's easy to get confused, but not necessarily if we know exactly what it is we're looking for. So, oh wait, that's EV God, sorry. What were we looking at? We were looking at besiegement, that's right. Let me just see if. Yeah, I wanted to make the book, so she said, thank you, I hadn't read the book. I wanted to make the book useful, available for everybody so that they could kind of do their own study. Okay. So it's in retreat, which is already kind of a bad, this T-square is in retreat already. And also, guess what? There is a return of virtue. because Saturn is retrograde. So that means that both Mars and Moon are having their virtue return. This is also return of virtue with detriment because they're both cadent. And so is Saturn. So this is two things, besiegement and return with detriment. So we know, this is kind of my point. Nobody wants to have these shitty things in their charts. We don't. We don't want them. We don't. We want to know, we want people, especially now, people think that the chart should be telling them how to have the perfect life. That's not what's going on in the chart. We can help. We can give, we can know it based on what we know, we can help, but that's not what's going on really for us in the chart, right? What's going on is figuring out what's happening so that then we can help, right? What's happening is the 10th, the 7th, the first house, probably the 6th is involved, right? So this might be similar to the other one where life isn't good. I don't have a lot of luck. I get sick a lot. In this particular case, Moon is in Jupiter's sign. So it's not necessarily, thankfully. Now, what if the Moon were in Aquarius, right? Then we would know there'd be difficulties. So anyway, so that's that. And then I think I may have one more. Why am I getting so sick? Return with detriment. No, that's it. I'm going to stop the recording and then open it to conversation, and you can ask questions.